in to our first panel today. And so this first panel is really focused on being in the field with SFLR. And our hope is to give you a sense of what this work looks like on the ground. And so we have 4 guests with us today. Cheryl Peterson, who is the Assistant Managing Director of McIntosh Seed. This is the site, SFLR site based in Georgia. We have Dr. Terri Lyles, who is a North Carolina landowner, along with her son, Ellis Lyles. They will tell a little bit of their story and working alongside our Roanoke, North Carolina team. And then we also have Jonathan Evans, who is an outreach specialist with Winston County Self-Help Cooperative. So if you can give a virtual round of applause to our panelists as we kick off this conversation. I also want to let you know that I have my questions prepared, but we also have a Q&A box here at the bottom of your screen. And so if you have questions for our panelists, both for this panel and moving into the rest of our day together, feel free to drop the questions in the Q&A box, or you can place it in the chat and me and the team will do our best to get to those questions. And I see the applause. Wonderful. Glad you all are here. And we can come out of screen share mode, Desiree. Wonderful. Well, good morning, panelists. Thank you again so much for being here. It's good to see you all. I want to kick things off by posing a question to Ms. Cheryl Peterson at McIntosh Seed. I think your story of becoming a part of SFLR is just really emblematic of what it means to be a part of the network and the incredible work you all are doing in coastal Georgia. So can you share the story with us of how McIntosh Seed came to be a part of SFLR and why this partnership has been so important to you in your community?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. McIntosh Seed was doing a lot of work in the Deep South, working in marginalized communities, and specifically Alabama, Mississippi, and Georgia. And so as we were traveling between Georgia and Alabama, Mississippi, we would drive through communities where we would see forests that had been harvested. And so over the course of several years of making the trek from Georgia to Alabama to Mississippi, we noticed the growth. And so there was reforestation that was taking place. And so we noticed the growth of the trees over the course of the years. And so we just began to wonder, who tells our community about these resources that are available? Because obviously there was a plan in place for reforestation. But in our communities, particular communities of color, we live for the big harvest, but there's not necessarily a plan in place for reforestation. And so you'll see all of these big debris piles after a harvest, but you don't necessarily see reforestation happening, and definitely not happening consistently. So we started asking questions because we had great partnerships like with the U.S. Forest Service. So we reached out to Amadou, we reached out to Alan McGregor, to Mickey Sager at the Conservation Fund, to Alicia Kramer, Danielle. We just started asking questions about what resources were available, who was out there to help landowners, who did the education in communities, where do you access these resources? And so we just really did a deep dive in asking questions, and we found out that there really wasn't a whole lot of intentional effort put toward engaging African-American landowners, and specifically in communities of color, marginalized communities. And we even had a situation where we were speaking with someone from an agency, and they just said, we're so glad that you all are stepping into this space because we don't work with small acreage landowners. And small acreage land ownership can vary from anywhere to anyone having less than 500 acres to anyone having less than 2,500 acres or less than 100,000 acres. You're considered a small acreage landowner. Well, in most of the communities where we were working and with most of our landowners, they have less than 100 acres. And so if there is not a direct intention of reaching out to these landowners and helping them to understand the asset that they hold, whether that's 5 acres, 20 acres, or 40, whatever it is that that family holds, it is an asset for that family. It's an opportunity for wealth building. It's an opportunity to prevent land loss. And so we stepped into that space, and SFLR gave us that opportunity. So we've been a member of the SFLR Network since 2016. We were one of 2 applicants that were selected for the second phase. So we came in with the University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff. And we're glad to be in that space. We're glad to bring our partners into that space so that we can be able to do the education and outreach and bring the resources and make the connections for landowners.
That's incredible. Thank you, Ms. Cheryl, for sharing. And I might circle back with more questions about some of the stories that I know have come out of your community. For this moment, I
Sure.
want to switch to Dr. Terri Wade Lyles. We had the pleasure of connecting as we were working on the SFLR podcast project. And so I'd love to hear from you. Just what's the story? What's your landowner story? How did you come to be a landowner in North Carolina? How did you come to work with our team at Roanoke Cooperative? Would you mind sharing that with all of us?
Yes, and good morning, everyone. And Bethany, thank you for having me and allowing me to share this story. We found our way to North Carolina just because it happened to be a space that we vacationed in often, and we thought it was beautiful. My ex and I had thought about owning land, something we could pass on to our children, a place where we could retire. And so when it came time to really make that happen, we found ourselves in Edenton, North Carolina. We never considered, though, we purchased 22 acres in a gated community. And I think what caught us by surprise was, first of all, the connection that you've purchased, right? It's beautiful. You realize, as was said earlier, the asset that you have. Um, you also begin to connect with it in a way that you become responsible for it. It's not just this place you're going to put a house on, or, you have this vision for what it'll become, but you really begin to connect with it on a level that you realize the depth of what you have. And so as it played out, there were a lot of challenges with that also. I think we've shared with your team some very funny videos of having cleared land that we realized had an outdated wetlands map and finding ourselves in the middle of a running river because we had land cleared that we should not have had. And so I met up with the SFLR team by chance, by recommendation of my USDA partner, which I quickly began to understand I needed some partners in helping me understand the resources, what I just really needed to do to grasp and take responsibility for that land, to restore the land. But here's the other thing. I thought about what we were going to pass on and this legacy of our land for my children. I had this vision, but um, I don't know that I had considered the sustainability for my children, for my family, setting the land up in a way where it was, because at that point it was costing us money to have paid for it, to invest it in it. We did not consider that. And so passing on something to my children that not only they could understand, but they could sustain, and a way understanding how that land could also be an asset within itself and sustain itself. So the team there quickly began to be my extension, my lifeline. um, a number of folks who always knew the resources, who I was introduced to other landowners who certainly could make me feel like I was not alone and not frustrated. And although I probably was really overwhelmed, to help me really channel that energy somewhere else and stay in the game. And so it gets a little deeper than that, but I am one of those small acreage landowners. And the SFLR team does make me feel like, although it's just, it's under 25 acres, it's still an important 25 acres.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing it.
Mhm.
I'm gonna jump around a little bit, so I didn't fully prep you for this. But Ellis, I'd love to hear from you, and then we'll circle back to Jonathan. Um, how did it land with you when your parents said, "We're buying this land, we're investing in this land. We hope that you will cherish it with the same desire that we do." How did that feel being that next generation? I know lots of families go through this, so I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I actually think that's super funny because I had no idea that they're even buying the land. So they didn't give us a heads up or anything. It was actually kind of a random call where they were like, "Hey, we purchased land out in North Carolina," and we were like, "What?" Um, so it was a really cool experience. We've always been nature kids. I mean, my parents always got us traveling outside and outdoors. I'm myself work in the field of wildlife and environmental sciences. So it's been a long journey to say the least, and I've been able to apply some of my own skills that I learned through college and throughout my years of working inside the field to the land now, and being able to contribute in new and different ways. So it's definitely been a long journey. It's been a long acceptance of getting used to the terrain in North Carolina, because I think one of the things that my mom didn't mention was that we lived up in Cleveland when we purchased the land, and it's kind of been a long journey for us to even get down to North Carolina. But just in this last few months, I've actually moved down here. So I live here in Raleigh, North Carolina now. So I actually have some feet on the ground to actually be able to help and get the land together now. Because we've had it for about 9 years now. It's been a long journey of different people trying to move down here, living here for a second, but then having to leave, us being back and forth, paying for Airbnbs to come and check in on the land and get it together. So I'm really happy to finally be here to actually be able to do some work, connect with the land, and actually start to write out blueprints of what we want to see in the future for it.
Ah,
You know,
that's-
if I could, Bethany, if I could also say and add to that, when we found ourselves in the midst of this river running through our property, which was dry right before that, it was Ellis that helped us to restore it. And I felt like I could understand that tuition money we had paid for those 4 years of college. Um, because he took, where I was overwhelmed, and I think you have that video where I'm thinking, oh my God, like this water, and I'm sinking. It was Ellis that said, knew exactly what to do. And where we are now is solely because of his knowledge with land restoration, what he learned and what he brought to the project, our project, which was originally land ownership, which became our family project. But he knew exactly what to do. And what we have now, I can see the progress. And I do owe that to him. If it was not for him, I would have had to have paid for someone or probably just not done anything with it at all.
Mhm. I'm really just so inspired by your story and by that multi-generational collaboration. And I know it also has its challenges, which we'll talk about here in a moment. But it's so important. We talk a lot about how do we ensure that what one generation decides is a priority, how do we ensure that that is passed on to the next generation, because that's what it's going to take to retain the land. And your story is really indicative of that. I want to switch gears for a moment to weave in Jonathan's perspective and experience. So, a part of how the SFLR network model works is that each site does it differently, but has kind of the same components to their team: forestry support, some sort of legal support, and then some sort of outreach support. And each of the sites has that model. And so, Jonathan, in your role as an outreach coordinator at the Winston County Self Help Cooperative in Winston County, in Mississippi, can you walk us through a day in your life as outreach coordinator? What do you do? What does that look like? Tell us a little bit about your work.
Yeah, so as an outreach coordinator, we it's very important to build these relationships within your community, these personal trust within the people that you serve, right? So my day is just calling landowners, making sure they have what they need, giving them technical assistance if we're able to, which most of the time we are. Um, Coming up with new ideas to be able to serve them better and finding community partners to be able to host future events, give our landowners the information that we may not have. So I feel like That relationship building and personal trust is what my day entails. Building that is what my day entails for sure.
Yeah, I think that's something we often miss or underestimate, just the time it takes to build relationships, to get to know people, to get to know their
Yeah.
families, to listen and figure out what's important to them and to let their will guide the process, not our own desire for them. And so thank you for sharing that. I do want to remind the audience that we do have a Q&A feature here. So if you have any questions for this panel, please drop them in that box and we'll circle around to those here in a moment. Going back to the Lyles family, and specifically you, Ellis, I'd love to hear what have been some of the challenges you've navigated. We heard about the river that had to be addressed. But what have been some of the complexities and challenges, even relationally, you've had to navigate in co-stewarding this land with your parents and with your siblings? Because that's its own
Yeah.
dynamic as well.
One of the biggest challenges that we just now recently kind of started to reflect on is money. It's the amount of money out of our personal funds that kind of go into creating this land. We're trying to figure out ways on where it doesn't come out of our own individual pockets. Because just like my mom said, she shared about the river, but there was a time with an excavator that we got stuck in the mud. I just had to pay $500 to get our truck stuck out of the mud, which was trying to get our lawnmower stuck out of the mud. And all those things come out of our own personal funds and our own personal pocket. So trying to figure out resources and ways so it doesn't come out of our own finances. So we aren't getting upset and frustrated at each other for things that it's just money. And we get frustrated at each other because of it. But if we were able to figure out a way where there's another source of money being able to pay and help get our land together, then that's the easiest solution. And that's kind of been the biggest thing that the network has been able to help us with, is to find those different resources. And what Jonathan was just saying, it's about the community. There's so many different communities here in North Carolina. There's so many different resources. It's sometimes a little bit overwhelming on the amount of resources that are out there, especially inside of the state. But we're going to be soon taking some time to really look through all of the resources, kind of creating a nice little checkbox for us to be like, this is what we're able to do, this is what we're not able to do, this is what we're qualified for, this is what we're not qualified for, to really get it out of our own pocketbook so then we can still work our everyday lives, and then we can be able to fund and build this land how we want without it reaching into our pockets. But I would say finances has really been a big thing navigating, especially generationally, because mom, she's going to be retiring soon, and we got to start thinking about the generational shift that's going to be happening soon. And me and my sister have really had conversations of how we have to start to step up, and kind of start to be the adults and let my mom start to become an elder in the family. And we just start to take care of her and we actually start to get the land together ourselves. So just not talking about it, but actually living through the reality of her getting older, of us getting older, has really been a conversation of maturity and growth.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw
Yeah.
you came off mute. Dr. Terri, did you want to add something?
Yeah, our story has quickly changed over the short number of years that we've owned this. I no longer have a spouse. Ellis and I are actually officially co-owners for this property now. So instead of me owning it with my spouse, with this idea that it's going to be passed off to my children, um, and we had this idea that originally, before we were educated by the network there, we had this idea originally that we would divide it up and pass, a number of acres on to each child. Because of the education that I've received there, that is no longer the game plan. Um, but now Ellis and I are co-owners, and the amount of how quickly time is moving and what I need to consider again as a landowner, as a parent who's passing on an asset and a legacy, is that time seems to be getting away from me so quickly. And the idea that I need to pass the baton to my children and allow them to take ownership and to be a part of this vision. Because as Ellis said, I'm retiring soon and I'd like to just get up and take a stroll on the property with my cup of coffee. Um, and they figured it out, right?
Mm.
But it's the team there again when you realize that there are other property owners that are experiencing something a little similar
Yeah.
and you can talk to them. In the conference in November, I talked to a number of ones that said the same thing. That baton is hard to pass, right? That control is hard to pass to your children. But again, it's the education that I've gotten, and as I pass this control and power and baton over to them, it's the information that I have and the network I'm able to pass them off to help them explore and expand and to feel like they're being supported also, so they're making smart decisions, and that gives me more confidence as well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I imagine that resonates with even for panelists who are here that aren't landowners. We all have those areas of our lives where we know a transition is coming and we have to be willing to share. And that's the essence of partnership, even within a family or an organization. I want to, there's a question that's been posed by an attendee for Ms. Cheryl. So I'm going to read it for you, Ms. Cheryl. It says, "Hi, Cheryl, you've done so much to support Black landowners through your programs. Thank you. Could you walk us through some initiatives that are top of mind?" That's part one. And then also, based on your conversations with both current and prospective landowners, what are the biggest challenges and needs they're facing as they start to expand their operations? So it's a two-part question. What are some initiatives that are top of mind? And then what are some of the biggest challenges and needs current and prospective landowners are facing?
I would begin by saying right now we're exploring a lot of climate smart initiatives and trying to help landowners understand where they fit into this conversation when we start talking about climate smart, when we start talking about reducing our carbon footprint, like where do landowners come into this conversation because they hear a lot on the news. And so we're doing a lot of education to help them understand where they fit into that conversation, what conservation practices they currently have in place, what they can put into place. I'm going to piggyback off of the other panelists. It's really important that when we're having these conversations, that we do have the current owner, we have the next generation of owners, but the job that Jonathan does is key because he's the outreach coordinator. He's the person who's making that personal touch with the families and helping them to understand what they have, what they can currently do with that asset, what's available in terms of resources, and making those connections. When we start talking about carbon sequestration, a lot of families are asking, how can I do this? How can I get involved? Well, it requires a lot of education around the whole initiative about carbon sequestration and helping families to understand where they fit into that conversation. Is this a resource that they would be able to take advantage of? We are just trying to make sure that the next generation of owners are in those conversations. Sometimes it's really difficult for families to have those conversations about transition because they've owned this asset for a long period of time. They've got matriarchs or patriarchs of the families who've taken responsibility, but the information hasn't been passed on. So as part of our larger land loss prevention or generational wealth, we want to make sure that we're having those conversations with families and encouraging them to bring on the next generation of landowners so that they go into ownership knowledgeable, they're equipped, they know where the resources are, they know where the conservation stewardship plan is located, they know what phase of that stewardship plan they're going to be picking up and implementing. And so they have to be a part of that conversation. So I'm glad that the Lyles are doing that and having that conversation. Part of the challenge that we run into is with the resources. Lack of the sufficient amount of resources for families, because like you said, it costs a lot of money to implement these conservation practices. And if you don't qualify for programs, then that means you're coming out of pocket. And
Yeah.
for some families, that's a challenge. And when you're in marginalized communities, that's a double whammy. And so trying to make the dots and make those connections with those financial resources that are available and making sure that families are eligible for the resources that are available. Another challenge, I'm going to go to Jonathan, is the amount of support that is required. This is a very high touch program. We are providing a lot of direct hands-on support for landowners. In a lot of situations, we are navigating processes right along with you. When you enter, we're going through the landowner profile with you. We're sitting down with you, asking you, what are the goals for your land? And in some cases, families may say, I don't know, we own it, I've never done anything with it, and so I don't really have any goals. So walking and navigating those processes with landowners and helping them to make those direct connections back to the land, bringing them to the land and helping them to understand this is your family's asset. This is your family's legacy. You have ancestors that have fought long and hard and have suffered the horrors and traumas in order for you to be able to own the asset that you have. And so let's keep that in the family. Let's manage it in a very sustainable way so that we can pass it on to the next generation. But that takes a lot of support. And I think that people don't understand the high level of support that is needed for landowners and helping them to navigate these processes. For a lot of our landowners, this is the first time that they've interacted with forestry professionals. This is the first time that they've been in conversations where they are hearing lingo and language that's unfamiliar to them. And so being able to explain that in a way that landowners understand, being able to help support them as they navigate those processes is very important. So we're working with landowners from the beginning of coming in, sitting down, doing some goal setting, getting your farm and tract number all the way through you're applying to NRCS for resources. We're helping you with your equip contract. We're helping you with the vendors, like just navigating that whole process, but all of it borders on just providing landowner support, landowner education, and engaging landowners in that process.
That's so rich. Thank you for breaking that down for us. The high touch piece of it is something that I'm often working to help people understand everything. I mean, there's so many questions when you're new to this work of land stewardship, even the very practical details of filling out your paperwork. It's a big load. And so I really appreciate the work that you're doing, Ms. Cheryl, and all of the sites to help close that gap for landowners, because it really makes a world of difference. I want to jump down to a question that's been sent in for Jonathan. So the question says, Winston County Self-Help has done such a great job of building partnerships over time. Can you speak to some of the partnerships that you all have as an organization and how those partnerships are supporting your clients, your landowners?
So we just recently started our edge property initiative in Louisiana. We are currently connecting Louisiana Appleseed, which is a nonprofit law firm that deals with heirs property. They do wills, they sometimes do successions and things like that. Those are some of the things that I've been able to really tap into and get a deeper understanding of how this works and how important it is for people to preserve that land, that legacy, like Michelle was saying earlier.
Jonathan, kind of to build off of that, in providing, so working with Louisiana Appleseed, that's one partnership. I'm wondering what are some things that people often misunderstand about supporting the rural landowners in your community? What's maybe a misconception they have? What comes to mind for you?
I'm gonna piggyback off of Ms. Cheryl, that community outreach specialists we have to have a deep understanding of everything. Like our education has to be very extensive when it comes to helping landowners because like we all said, they are navigating something that they have never, like something new. They're just in something in an area that they're not very familiar with, and we have to help them every step of the way. So our education is very important. We have to be very thorough with the way we go about learning these new things and helping these landowners navigate that as well.
That's great.
Bethany, I'm going to add on to what Jonathan said. Another big part of the heirs property work that Jonathan is doing involves dispelling myths. There are so many myths in the community about heirs property and who's a rightful owner, who's not a rightful owner. And people have been operating off of traditional information that in many cases just isn't correct. And one of the big myths is that if you are the person paying the taxes, then you're the sole owner. And so doing those education and outreach sessions are so important because you have to help families understand that just because you're the person who's always gotten the tax bill or you've always paid the taxes doesn't necessarily mean that you're the sole owner of that property. And so when you're doing those heirs property work sessions, just dispelling all of the myths for families is very eye-opening for them. And sometimes that creates situations where folks have a difficult time understanding the legalities around heirs property. And so just helping families walk through that piece by piece. And then sometimes you're doing mediation because there are some family disagreements. And so I don't want people to diminish the role of the outreach coordinator, the program manager person. And so when I talk about high touch, those are examples of where the outreach person really has to step into that role, do the outreach, the engagement, the education, but also build trust within the families and also mediate conversations within families.
Yeah. I want to jump to, we have a couple more questions left for this panel. So this next set is for Dr. Terri and Ellis. The question is, to the Lyles family, after dealing with the challenges of your land, how do you remain resilient and not give up? What's kept you in the game?
I would say we've given up several times. There's been a lot of challenging moments. There's been a lot of challenging times. There's been a lot of decisions that were made that were not the right decision to make. But still we evolve, we persevere because this has been a complete journey. When we first started off, just like what Cheryl just said, we didn't know what resources were out there. We had a lot of myths going on, and we were Cleveland folk coming down to North Carolina. So our first thought were, are we going to become farmers? Are we going to start to grow crops? We have land. That's what people do with land, right? They grow
Right.
crops and they become farmers. And we've totally grown from that journey to now looking at new ways to utilizing the land. We've learned about how to have different conservation easements, how to use the land for timber and for lumber, how to use the land to possibly have a nature Airbnb or to even be a venue for weddings or social events. So we've been thinking outside of the box, and the way we keep our resilience up is by evolving with the partners that are working with the land. When the land was first with my parents, it was much more of that farming mindset. It was much more of like keeping up with the property. Now that it's evolved more into me and my sister, I'm a nature kid. My sister is a psychologist. So she's looking at making a therapy program on the land, utilizing it as a retreat space. So it keeps on evolving and it keeps it fun, it keeps it fresh. We keep on learning about new resources and new ways to divide up the land. And when we're fully ready to launch in the next few years, then we'll be ready with all the information that we had. So it's going to take time. It's a time process. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take a couple years. There's going to be some fighting. There's going to be some harsh words that you have to go through, but you have to get through it to get to the other side. So
And I think from my perspective, right, as long as they all remember that what mom really wants is to retire and to walk around on this property with her cup of coffee. Eventually, I want to figure out how to build my house, put it on it, and trust the decisions that the kids are making. I think that it it has brought us closer together. We've had to be very honest and to not regret some of the wrong decisions we've made because we've learned from them. And I've also talked to some other landowners that I have met through the network and been able to share with them some of the kind of wrong turns that we've made. So if I can use that information and those experiences to help other people and to see them as growth, not as um uh I don't want to use the word stupid, but not as an uninformed choice. I've learned to be okay with that.
Yeah.
Um, our money is we own our property free and clear. And like Ellis said, it's been a really long, costly journey. Um, and to not be frustrated with that, to find ways that we continue to move together as a family and to see this not as a thorn in our side, but as a place like our legacy. When we finally get there, we will get there. I believe we will get there. And whatever this vision is, I have 4 children. So, myself, my 4 children, I have 1 grandchild. We all have agreed that this should land in the hands of the 1 grandchild. However we get there, we all agree that it's so important to the 5 of us that we want it to land eventually in her hands. Um, we have pictures of her when she was 12 months old and when she was 18 months old with a little shovel in her hand and out there working with us. And we want it to land in her hands and it be a place of memories and that she understands the blood, sweat, and tears that went into this. So we want it to continue to be that place where we found strength and we see kind of a victory of sorts in it when we get there. But we will get there together. This will not break us.
Yeah. Wow. I think that's a really beautiful place to land. I would ask as a final question for all of you, if you could sum up the work of SFLR Network in one word, what would it be? And that's to each of you.
I'll say lifeline. I know you said one word, but the team there, they feel like family, right? They feel like family. They help me work through my tears and my moments of frustration. And I feel comfortable with whatever I bring to them. So I'll stay with lifeline.
That's wonderful.
And I would say resourceful. I found so many different resources with the network. Not just the resources and opportunities that they gave me, but the people who I've connected with. You guys have been so helpful. Everybody who I talked to on the team is somebody new and diverse, and we just don't connect on the land. We connect on other things. Um, whether it's with my personal professional life, I'm always meeting new people to connect with and new friends. So it's been a great journey. It's going to be a network that we connect with for life and that we continue to connect with for the next generation as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Alice.
I think my word would be essential. The education and the community are both very important to all of the work that we do.
Yeah. Thanks, Jonathan.
So of course, Bethany, I have multiple words, but but I'm gonna go with the word empowering. This is for me, SFLR Network empowers families and it empowers them in a way that helps them make that connection to their land and be able to keep that land in their family and put them in a position of power where they have this asset that they can now pass down to the next generation. And for me, just seeing families get into that place of empowerment and taking ownership of that is just very rewarding.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you so much to each and every one of you for sharing your story, for sharing your work, for sharing your passion for family, for legacy, for education and empowerment. I'm really inspired even after this first conversation for today. So thank you so much for being here.